My ex-wife knocked on our honeymoon suite door at 11:40 at night, and before I could cross the room to stop her, my new wife opened it, smiling, still in her wedding dress, with no idea who was standing on the other side. I'm Daniel Reyes, 38, and 6 hours earlier, I had married Nora, with rice in my hair and my chest so full, I thought I'd finally outrun the wreckage of my first marriage. Because 3 years ago, my ex-wife Camille was the one who packed a suitcase while I was at work and left a note on the counter that said she couldn't do hard anymore. And I had spent every day since learning how to trust that the people you love don't just vanish when the weather turns. Nora was the proof I'd healed. Nora was the calm after the storm, the woman who ran toward the things everyone else ran from. But now Camille was standing in our honeymoon doorway with rain on her coat and something desperate in her eyes, saying my name like she still had a right to it. And my new wife was the one holding the door open. So why had the woman who abandoned me without a word driven 3 hours through the rain to find me on my wedding night? What did she want on the one evening I'd finally let myself be happy? And why, when I braced for my new marriage to shatter before it began, did Nora step aside and quietly say, "You'd better come in"? For one long second, the whole world stopped. The rain filled the quiet. It tapped against the tall window behind us, soft and steady, like even the storm outside had leaned in to watch. Camille stood in the doorway with her coat soaked dark at the shoulders, her hair stuck flat against her cheek, and her eyes going straight past Nora, straight to me. I hadn't seen those eyes in 3 years. I used to know every feeling that ever lived in them. But the thing looking out of them now was something I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not the flat, frozen calm she'd worn the morning she disappeared. This was fear, the kind that shakes a person from the inside. "Daniel," she said again, so quiet I almost lost it under the rain. She said my name like it was the last solid thing in the world, the only thing keeping her upright. My legs finally worked. I moved, my heart slamming so hard I could feel it in my throat. 6 hours ago, I'd had cake on my chin and my whole chest glowing. 6 hours ago, Nora had spun me across a dance floor while 100 people clapped and my mother cried into a napkin. And now my two lives were standing 3 feet apart in a hotel doorway, and I could not pull a single breath all the way down. But before I could reach that door, Nora did the thing I never in 1,000 years expected. She didn't step back. She didn't turn to me for help. She looked at this soaked, trembling stranger standing on our wedding night, and something in my wife's face went soft and steady at the very same time. "You're freezing," Nora said gently. "Come inside before you make yourself sick." I stopped like I'd hit a wall. "Nora, Daniel." She said my name without even turning around, calm as still water on a windless morning. Whoever she is, she just drove through a storm to stand at our door. We can find out why in the warm. And that was the exact second I understood something about the woman I had married that afternoon. She was braver than me, because every muscle in my body was screaming to slam that door and pretend the last 3 years had never carved a hole in my chest. But Nora held it open with one steady hand. Camille stepped inside, water dripping off her onto the pale carpet, and the door clicked shut behind her. And just like that, my past and my future were breathing the same air in the same small room. And I had no idea which one of them I was about to lose before morning. Nora moved first. She crossed to the closet, pulled the thick white hotel robe off its hanger, and held it out like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "Here, get that wet coat off you." Camille stared at the robe like she didn't know what to do with kindness. "You don't even know who I am," she whispered. "No," Nora said, "but you're shaking, and that's enough for right now." I watched my new wife hand a warm robe to the woman who had shattered me, and something twisted deep in my chest that I couldn't put a name to. Half thank you, half please God, don't let this be happening. "Nora," I managed. My voice came out rough as gravel. "This is Camille." I let the name fall into the room. I watched it travel. I watched it reach her. And I saw the exact moment my wife understood, because her hand paused, just for a single heartbeat, in the air between them. Camille, the name I used to say in my sleep for a whole year after the divorce. The name Nora knew from the one long, hard conversation we'd had months ago, the night I finally told her everything. The double shift, the half-empty house, the note with 4 short sentences, sitting on the kitchen counter under the salt shaker, like it was nothing at all. Nora's face didn't crack. It didn't turn to stone either. She just breathed in slow, laid the robe over Camille's arm, and said one word. Okay. Just that. Okay. Like she was setting down something heavy, and choosing, on purpose, to carry it anyway. Then she looked at me, and in her eyes was the question she was too kind to ask out loud in front of a stranger. Are you all right? I wasn't. Not even a little. But I nodded, because that's what you do when the floor is falling out from under you, and you don't want the person you love to fall too. Camille peeled off her ruined coat with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Underneath it, she wore a plain gray sweater and old jeans. Nothing like the sharp, polished woman I used to know. No makeup, no armor, just a tired face and 2 red-rimmed eyes. She pulled the robe tight around her shoulders and lowered herself onto the very edge of the little sofa by the window, like she was scared that taking up too much space might get her thrown back out into the rain. I know how this looks, she said. Her voice broke clean in half on the last word. Showing up here, tonight, of all the nights in the world. It looks insane, I said, and it came out harder than I meant it to. 3 years of buried hurt came up all at once, and rode out on those 2 words. She flinched like I'd raised a hand. You have every right to be angry. Angry? A short, ugly laugh scraped out of me. Camille, you left a note. 4 sentences. I came home from a 16-hour shift, and half the house was gone, and so were you. No phone call. No goodbye. No explanation a grown man could hold in his hands. 3 years of silence. And now you knock on my honeymoon door? The room went dead quiet. Even the rain seemed to hush. Nora didn't say a word. She just quietly walked to the little counter, filled the electric kettle, and clicked it on, giving us the strange mercy of a small, normal sound, while the big, terrible thing sat in the middle of the room. And then Camille lifted her eyes to mine, and the tears finally spilled over and ran down her face, and she said the sentence that pulled the ground out from under everything I thought I knew. I left because I was sick, Daniel. Really sick. And I couldn't stand for you to watch it happen to me. The kettle hummed. My ears rang. What? It was all I could get out. 3 years ago. She wrapped her arms around herself like she was holding her own body together. A month before I left, I found out I was sick. The kind of sick where the doctors sit you down and lower their voices and start using words you have to look up later when you're alone. She wiped her face, but more tears just took the place of the old ones. And I looked at you, Daniel. You, working double shifts to save for the house. So happy, so sure we had all this time. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't put you through watching me disappear an inch at a time. I couldn't move. I couldn't feel my own hands. So you ran, I said. The words came out cracked. So I ran. She nodded, and it was the nod of someone who had hated herself for it every single day. I told myself I was being kind. I told myself leaving fast would hurt you less than watching me lose. I wrote that stupid note because I couldn't write the true one. Because if I'd written the true one, I never would have been able to leave. And I really thought, I was going to die, and you'd be free to start over without a sick room and a funeral hanging over your whole young life. Behind me, I heard Nora go very still by the counter. The note said you couldn't do hard, I whispered. You let me believe I wasn't worth the hard part. For 3 years I thought, my voice gave out. I had to start again. I thought I was the kind of man people leave when things get difficult. Do you understand what that did to me? Do you have any idea what I had to climb out of to trust anyone again? I know, she breathed. I know, and I am more sorry than I have words for. The kettle clicked off. The little room was thick with steam and rain and 3 years of grief finally cracking open. And then the question I was terrified to ask crawled up my throat, because she was here, and she was breathing, and she was sitting on the edge of my honeymoon sofa very much alive. Camille, I swallowed. If you were dying, why are you here? What happened? She looked up at me, And for the first time since she'd walked in out of the storm, something flickered behind the fear. Something that looked almost like wonder. Almost like a person who had walked to the edge of a cliff and somehow been handed back her own life. "That's the thing, Daniel," she said softly. "I didn't die. The rain kept falling. I lived," she said. "I fought for 2 years and I lived. And the day the doctors finally told me I was in the clear, the very first thing I understood, standing in that parking lot with my test results shaking in my hand, was that I had thrown away the one person who would have held me through all of it. I threw you away to protect you, and I was wrong. And I have spent a whole year trying to work up the courage to tell you the truth to your face." She pressed a hand over her mouth for a second, gathering herself. "I didn't know about the wedding," she said. "I swear to you on my life. I didn't know until I called your brother tonight to ask where you were. I've had this letter in my bag for 4 months. She reached into the coat pooled at her feet and pulled out an envelope, soft and worn at the corners, from being carried and never sent. "I only meant to give you this. I never meant to walk into—" Her eyes went to Nora, then to Nora's white wedding dress, and her whole face collapsed with the horror of her own timing. "Oh God, it's your wedding night. What have I done? I have to go. I shouldn't have." She shot up off the sofa, the robe slipping, reaching blind for her wet coat, ready to run back out into the storm, the same way she'd once run out of my life. But she never made it to the door. Because Nora, my Nora, standing there in her wedding dress with a kettle steaming behind her and a stranger's whole broken history spilling across her honeymoon suite floor, crossed the room and gently, firmly, caught Camille's arm. "Sit down," Nora said. Camille froze. "You don't understand. I'm the last person who should be in this room tonight. I understand more than you think." Nora's voice was quiet, but it had steel woven all the way through it, the kind of steadiness she'd learned somewhere I hadn't asked about yet. "You spent 3 years believing you had to disappear so the man you loved wouldn't have to watch you suffer. You thought love meant carrying the whole weight alone, in the dark, so nobody else got crushed by it." Nora's eyes were shining now, but her hand on Camille's arm never wavered. "I know exactly what that looks like," she said. "Because I spent 6 years as a hospice nurse, watching people do the bravest, loneliest, most heartbreaking thing a person can do. Try to spare everyone else the cost of loving them. And I will not let one more person walk out into the rain believing that's what love is." The room went utterly silent. Camille stared at her. I stared at her. My wife of 6 hours had just reached into the exact center of the wound and named it out loud. Camille's. And without ever saying so, mine too. Camille sank slowly back down onto the sofa, like her legs had simply stopped holding her. And Nora turned and looked at me, and I saw that her calm had cost her something. I saw the tremble she'd been hiding under all that steadiness. She wasn't unaffected. She wasn't some saint who felt nothing. She was a woman who had chosen, breath by breath, to be brave for 2 people who were falling apart in front of her. One of them her brand new husband, and the other, the ghost who'd made him afraid to be loved in the first place. "Daniel," she said, and her voice finally shook, just a little. "I need you to hear me. I'm not opening this door tonight because I'm not scared. I'm terrified. My hands are shaking. She is your ex-wife, and it is our wedding night, and everything in me wants to fall apart." She took a breath. "But I didn't marry you because I thought your past was gone. I married you knowing there was a hole in you, shaped exactly like this night, and I would rather walk into it beside you than pretend it isn't there and let it swallow us both later." She wiped her cheek fast, almost angry at her own tears. "So we are going to sit down, all 3 of us, and we are going to let her say the things she drove 3 hours through a storm to say. Because unfinished stories don't disappear when you close the door on them, Daniel. They just wait. And I am not spending my marriage married to something that's still waiting in the dark." I looked at her, this woman in her wedding dress, mascara smudged, chin up, terrified and unmovable all at once. And I finally understood what I'd actually married. Not the calm after the storm. The person who walks into the storm and holds your hand while it breaks over both of you. "Okay," I heard myself say. The same word she'd given Camille. The word that means I'm scared, and I'm staying anyway. Okay. Camille looked between the two of us, at the wife who wouldn't run and the husband learning, in real time, that he'd finally chosen someone who wouldn't, and she began, quietly, to cry, in a completely different way. Not the frightened crying from the doorway. Something more like grief. Something more like relief. The crying of a person watching. Up close. The exact kind of love she'd once been too scared to let herself have. He got it right, she whispered, mostly to herself. The second time. He got it right. The rain kept falling against the window. And she reached out, with a hand that had stopped shaking, and set the worn envelope down on the small table between us. Before I say anything else, Camille said, there's something in that letter you need to read first, Daniel. Because the reason I'm really here, the whole reason I finally couldn't stay away, it isn't just that I lived. She looked up. It's what I found out after. Before I reached for the envelope, I looked at it like it might bite me. It sat there on the little table, soft and worn at the corners, the paper gone gray from being carried in a bag for 4 months. My name was written across the front in Camille's handwriting, the same slanted letters that had once filled grocery lists and birthday cards, and, at the very end, 4 cold sentences on a kitchen counter. My hand didn't want to move. Daniel, Nora said softly. She had pulled a chair close and sat down beside me, close enough that her knee touched mine. You don't have to read it this second, but whatever's in it, you're not reading it alone. I'm right here. That was the thing that got me. Not that she let me read it, that she stayed. I picked up the envelope. My fingers were clumsy. I slid one thumb under the flap and pulled out a single folded page, and the second I opened it, a small photograph fell out and landed face up on my knee. I looked down, and the whole room tilted. It was a picture of a child, a little boy, maybe 2 years old, sitting in the grass in a yellow shirt, laughing at something off to the side of the camera. He had dark curls. He had a gap between his front teeth, and he had my mother's eyes. The exact same shape, the exact same brown. The eyes I saw in the mirror every single morning of my life. I stopped breathing. Camille. My voice didn't sound like mine. Who is this? She was crying again, but quietly now, her hands folded in her lap like a woman waiting for a verdict. His name is Sam, she whispered. He's 2.5. The math hit me before she even finished the sentence. 2.5 years old. She'd left 3 years ago. He's yours, Daniel. She said it so gently, like she knew the words were a hammer, no matter how softly she swung them. He's ours. I was already pregnant when I left. I found out about the baby and the sickness in the same week. The photograph shook in my hand. That little boy laughed up at me from the grass, frozen in a moment I hadn't been there for. I have a son, I said. Not a question, just a fact too big to fit in my mouth. I have a son, and you didn't tell me. For 3 years. I know. She pressed her lips together hard. I know, and there's no excuse big enough, so I'm not going to reach for one. But I'm going to tell you the truth. All of it. Even the parts that make me look like the worst person you've ever met. You deserve that much. Nora's hand found mine under the table and held on. She didn't say a word. She just held on, steady as a rope, while my whole world rearranged itself around a photograph. When I found out I was sick, Camille said, the doctors told me the treatment could hurt the baby. They told me I might have to choose. And I was so scared, Daniel, scared of the sickness, scared of losing him, scared of losing myself. And on top of all of it, I looked at you, so young, working yourself to the bone, dreaming about the little house with the good kitchen, and I thought, if I stay, he watches me get sick, maybe watches me die, and gets left alone with a baby and a mountain of hospital bills before he's even 35. She wiped her face. I told myself I was setting you free, but the truth, the real, ugly truth, is that I was drowning, and I made a terrible choice while I was drowning. And then I was too ashamed to ever undo it. Every month that passed made it harder. How do you call a man after 6 months and say, by the way, you have a son? After a year, after 2, the longer I hid, the more impossible it got. Shame builds walls, Daniel, and I built mine so high I couldn't see over them anymore. The treatment, I said. My throat was tight. The baby, Sam, he's healthy, and for the first time, a real, watery smile broke across her face. He's perfect. We were both lucky. They found a way to treat me that kept him safe. He was born small but strong, and he's been running me ragged ever since. Her smile trembled. He asks about his dad. He's 2.5, and he already asks. And every time he does, I feel the weight of what I stole from both of you. I stared at the photograph, at the gap in his teeth, at my mother's eyes. 3 years I'd spent believing I was a man people left when things got hard. 3 years I'd spent rebuilding myself from that lie, brick by brick, until I was finally whole enough to stand at an altar and promise myself to Nora. And the whole time, there had been a little boy in a yellow shirt, laughing in the grass, waiting for a father who didn't even know he was born. Something broke open in my chest. It wasn't anger. I kept waiting for the anger, and it didn't come the way I expected. What came instead was grief, huge and total. For every first step I'd missed, every first word, every night that little boy had gone to sleep without me because his mother had been too frightened and too ashamed to pick up a phone. I put my face in my free hand and I wept. Not quietly. The kind of crying that comes up from somewhere under your ribs. The kind you can't dress up or hold back. And through all of it, Nora held my other hand and did not let go. When I could finally breathe again, I lifted my head and I looked at my new wife. Really looked at her, because I suddenly understood that this news changed her life too. She'd married a man this afternoon. Tonight she was learning he came with a 2.5-year-old son and the woman who'd hidden him. Nora, I started, and I didn't even know how to finish. I'm so sorry. This isn't what you signed up for. This morning, when you said yes, and my wife did the last thing I ever expected. On the hardest night of both our lives, she smiled. It was wet and it was shaking, but it was real. Daniel Reyes, she said. This afternoon I stood in front of everyone we love, and I promised to take all of you. Not the easy parts. All of you. She reached out and turned the photograph gently in my hand so we could both see it. And it turns out, all of you includes a little boy with your eyes. Her voice cracked. He's beautiful, Daniel. Look at him. Look at that laugh. I looked at her, stunned. You're not angry? Oh, I have feelings, she said, with a small broken laugh. I have about 100 of them, and I'll need a long time and probably a good therapist to sort them all out. I'm hurt. She waited. I'm scared of what this means for us. I'm grieving the simple little honeymoon we were supposed to have tonight. She squeezed my hand hard. But somewhere out there is a child who has spent his whole life without his father, and I am not capable of being angry at him. And I refuse to start our marriage by treating your son like a problem instead of a gift. Camille made a small sound, like all the air had gone out of her. I didn't come here to break anything, she whispered. I need you to believe that. I'm not here to win you back. I lost that right on a kitchen counter 3 years ago, and I know it. Her eyes went to Nora, and something in them was almost reverent. I came because Sam deserves a father, and because you deserve to know he exists, and because I couldn't stand being the reason he grows up the way I grew up, always feeling like there was a door somewhere that should have been open and never was. She took a shaky breath and reached into her bag one more time. This time she pulled out a child's drawing, a scribble of a stick figure man, tall, with brown scribbles for hair and a huge crayon smile. He drew this last week, she said. I asked him who it was. Her voice finally gave out completely. He said, "That's my daddy. He's coming." She set the drawing on the table next to the photograph. I don't know how he knew to say that. I never promised him you were coming. I didn't want to promise something I couldn't make true. She wiped her eyes. But he said it like he knew. And I got in my car that night, and I started driving, and I didn't stop until I was standing at your door. The rain had softened outside. The storm was passing. I looked at the drawing, at the tall stick figure with the crayon smile. He's coming. And I made a decision that reordered my entire life in the space of one breath. I want to meet him, I said. As soon as possible. Tomorrow, if I can. I've missed enough. I'm not missing one more day than I have to. Camille nodded, tears streaming, relief pouring off her like warmth off a radiator. But then I felt Nora go quiet beside me, and I turned, because I realized I'd just made an enormous promise about our life without asking the person I'd built that life with. Nora, I started. Go, she said immediately. What? Tomorrow. Go meet him. Her chin was doing that brave, trembling thing again. Daniel, that little boy has waited 2.5 years. He is not going to wait through a honeymoon so we can have room service and pretend the world outside this door doesn't exist. She looked at me, fierce and soft all at once. We'll have 1,000 ordinary mornings. He's only 2.5 once. Go be his father. I have loved exactly 2 women in my life, and in that moment, I understood the difference between them with perfect, painful clarity. One had run from the hard thing to protect me from it. The other was standing in her wedding dress at midnight, shoving me gently toward the hardest, most beautiful thing that had ever landed on our doorstep, because she loved me enough to want me to have it. How did I get this lucky? I said, half to her, half to the ceiling, half to whatever quiet thing arranges our lives when we aren't looking. You didn't, Nora said, and there was that watery smile again. You did the work. You climbed out of the hole she left you in. You became a man who could recognize the real thing when it finally showed up. She glanced at Camille, and there was no cruelty in it, only a strange and hard-won grace. That's not luck, Daniel. That's the reward for surviving. Camille lowered her head. When she spoke, her voice was barely there. She's right, she said. About all of it. She looked up at Nora. Is it all right if I say something to you? Just you? Nora nodded. Thank you, Camille whispered, for opening the door. I know what it cost you. I've spent 3 years too scared to open doors, and I know exactly how heavy they are. You could have left me out in the rain, and you'd have had every right, and instead you handed me a robe. She pressed a hand to her chest. Sam is going to grow up with a father and a stepmother who, on the worst-timed night of her life, chose to be kind to a stranger who didn't deserve it. He's going to be okay. For the first time in 3 years, I actually believe he's going to be okay. And the 3 of us sat there in that little room. The husband, the new wife, and the ghost who turned out to be a mother, not a monster. While the storm finally quieted into a soft and ordinary rain, I looked down at the photograph one more time. At my son. At his laugh. At my mother's eyes looking back at me across 2.5 stolen years. Sam, I said out loud, just to feel the name in my mouth. My son's name. Sam, Nora repeated softly, beside me, trying it on too. The name of a child who, without either of us planning it, had just become part of the family we'd started that afternoon. And I realized the honeymoon I thought I'd lost tonight hadn't been ruined at all. It had just gotten bigger than I ever imagined. The next morning, the storm was gone, and the sky over the coast was the soft, washed-out blue of a world that had cried itself out and felt better for it. I barely slept. How could I? I lay awake most of the night with that photograph propped against the lamp, staring at a little boy in a yellow shirt, learning his face by heart. Nora lay next to me, and every so often her hand would find mine in the dark, and neither of us would say anything, because some things are too big for words at 3 in the morning. Camille had taken a room down the hall. Before she went, she'd given me an address and a time, and she'd said one last thing at the door. He wakes up early. He likes pancakes. And Daniel, she'd paused, he's going to love you. He already does. He's just been waiting for a face to put it on. We drove out at 9. Camille was staying with her sister, an hour up the coast, in a small house with a red door and a swing set in the yard that made my chest ache the second I saw it. A swing set. My son had a swing set, and I'd never once pushed him on it. I sat in the car for a long moment, unable to make my hands open the door. I'm scared, I admitted. I know, Nora said. What if I'm not good at it? What if he doesn't? What if it's weird? What if I've missed too much? What if he looks at me, and there's just nothing? Nora reached over and turned my face toward hers. Daniel. That little boy drew a picture of a daddy he'd never met and said he's coming. Her eyes were bright. You're not walking in there to earn his love. You're walking in there to collect it. It's already yours. It's been waiting for you the whole time. She smiled. Now go on. I'll be right behind you. I got out of the car. The red door opened before I even reached it. Camille stood there, and behind her legs, peeking out, one small hand gripping the doorframe, was a little boy, with dark curls and a gap in his teeth, and my mother's eyes. He looked up at me. I looked down at him, and the whole world went quiet. "Sam," Camille said softly, kneeling down beside him. "Remember how we talked about your daddy? Remember the man in your picture?" She smoothed his hair back. "He came, baby. He's here." Sam studied me with the serious, unblinking honesty that only very small children have. He looked at my face for a long time, and I stood there on that doorstep and I let him look, because he had every right to take all the time in the world. Then he tilted his head. "Daddy?" he said. One word. 2 syllables. The word I didn't know I'd been starving for my entire life. "Yeah, buddy," I managed, and my voice broke clean in half. I got down on my knees on that porch, so we were the same height. "Yeah, it's me. I'm your daddy. I'm so sorry it took me so long to get here." And Sam, who did not know about kitchen counters or 4-sentence notes or 3 years of silence, who knew only that the man from his picture was finally, actually there. Sam let go of the doorframe, took 2 wobbly steps, and walked straight into my arms, like he'd been doing it his whole life. I wrapped him up. I pressed my face into his curls. He smelled like syrup and sleep and baby shampoo, and he was warm and solid and real, and every single day I'd grieved came rushing up and out of me at once. I cried into my son's hair on a stranger's porch, and he patted my back with one small hand, the way you comfort someone you love, and he said, "Don't cry, Daddy. You found me. You found me." I looked up through my tears. Nora stood a few feet back, one hand pressed over her mouth, crying openly and smiling at the same time. Camille was on the step, with both arms wrapped around herself, watching the exact moment she'd been too afraid to imagine for 3 years, sobbing with a relief so total it looked like joy. "I found you," I whispered into his hair. "I found you, and I am never, ever losing you again." That was 2 years ago. I want to tell you how it turned out, because I know some of you are bracing for it to go wrong. We're trained to expect the worst, but sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the door you're most afraid to open is the one that lets the light in. Sam is 4.5 now. He calls me Daddy, and he calls Nora Mama Nor, a name he invented himself the first week he met her, when she got down on the floor and built a block tower as tall as he was, and let him knock it over 11 times in a row without ever once losing her patience. He has a bedroom in our house, the little house with the good kitchen I'd dreamed about for years, and it's painted blue, and there's a swing set in the backyard, and I have pushed him on it approximately 10,000 times, and I will never, ever get tired of it. Camille and I never got back together. That was never what any of this was. She lives 20 minutes away now, and we share our son the way 2 people who finally grew up learned to do, with calendars and car seats and 100 small kindnesses. She and Nora, against every odd in the world, became something like friends. Not right away. It took time, and honesty, and more than one hard conversation. But the 2 women who love my son learned to stand on the same side, and Sam gets to grow up in a world where the grown-ups chose peace over pride. Camille told me once, near the end of a long, ordinary afternoon, that watching Nora open that door on our honeymoon night taught her what love actually was. "I always thought love meant protecting people from the hard stuff," she said. "By disappearing, by handling it alone. Nora taught me it's the opposite. Love is opening the door. Love is saying, 'Come in out of the rain,' to the very person you have every reason to leave standing in it." And here's the part that still undoes me. A few months ago, I found Nora in Sam's room at bedtime. She didn't know I was listening. Sam had asked her a question, one of those enormous questions little kids drop like it's nothing. "Mama Nor," he said, "are you ever gonna go away, like, leave?" And I stood frozen in that hallway, because that question was my whole life. That was the fear Camille had carved into me. That was the lie I'd spent 3 years climbing out of. People leave when the weather turns. And I heard my wife say, so simply, so surely, "No, baby, some people, when things get hard, they walk toward you, not away." She kissed his forehead. "I'm a walk toward you person, and so is your daddy. You're stuck with us forever." I leaned against that hallway wall, and I cried like a child, because the thing I once believed was broken in me had healed so completely that my son would never even know it had been broken at all. He will grow up certain, bone deep, no question certain, That the people who love him don't vanish when the storm comes. That's the whole thing, isn't it? That's what all of us are really afraid of. That when we're at our hardest to love, everyone will leave. But some people walk toward you. Find those people, marry those people, be that person. My ex-wife knocked on our honeymoon door in the middle of a storm, and I thought it was the end of everything I'd built. Instead, it was the beginning of the family I never knew I was missing. A son with my mother's eyes. A wife brave enough to open the door I was too scared to touch. And a truth I'll carry for the rest of my life. That the things we're most afraid of are sometimes just love, standing in the rain, waiting for someone to let it in. So let me ask you something, and I really do want to know. If you were Nora, if you were standing there in your wedding dress and your husband's whole hidden past knocked on the door in the middle of the night, would you have opened it? Could you have found that kind of grace? Tell me honestly in the comments. I read them all, and I promise you, your story matters to someone who needs to hear it today. And if this story moved you, if Sam's little voice saying you found me got you the way it got me, do me one small favor. Subscribe to the channel and tap that notification bell so it turns on. That little bell is the only way you'll know the moment the next story goes up, and trust me, the next one will stay with you just as long as this one did. Don't leave it to chance. Turn the bell on now so you never miss a story that might be the exact one you needed to hear. Because everyone deserves to be reminded, especially on the hard days. The right people don't leave when the weather turns. They walk toward you. They open the door, and they say, "Come in out of the rain."